There we go.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
We are recording.
Yay!
Yay! So welcome everybody that's here and that may be watching on YouTube. Welcome to our Q&A with the wonderful Black Women Let Loose Theatre Company, who are here.
Yay! Ha ha!
My name's Rebecca. I work for Red Rope Theatre with Matt and Lois, who are tuning in on YouTube, I believe. And we met through Ferment Festival, where you were doing a show. It was in the end of the summer, wasn't it? The months are merging.
Yes, it was in September.
Yeah. And so we kind of met virtually through that. And then I started watching some of your YouTube chats, kind of similar to this format. And I thought it'd be really great if we could do one together. So we haven't actually met in person. So I hope that we can once we're allowed out again.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited. I've been so looking forward to this one. Makes me sound like I haven't been looking forward to the others. Especially. So there's 6 of you, isn't there, in the company? But 4 of you here today. So I'll just, so if you just want to introduce yourselves and say a little bit before we kick off with the questions.
Okay, well, I think it was going to start. So my name is Christelle. I've known all the ladies for different work in the community before we came together. Most of my work is really community-based, and I also do a lot of visual storytelling. So I do a lot of work into writing, film. I've also got the background in as a makeup artist. So yeah, it's quite a lot of varied things that I do around. I wear different hats. So yeah, that's me.
Shall I go next? So I'm Ruth. Really great to be part of this discussion and to be part of the Red Rope Theatre sessions, or presentation sessions that you've been doing in the series. So like Christelle said, I've known everyone in the company outside of the company before we set up, and also I'm in another theatre company called Breathing Fire, which is a Black women's theatre company as well. We do improvisational theatre, which is mostly playback theatre, a form of theatre, and we've started doing forum theatre. And I'm working with other sort of companies as well. We're at the moment doing something with a company called Local Learning about the trapeze artist Carlos Trower, who lived in Bristol in the 1860s. Was a trapeze artist, a black trapeze, tightrope walker basically. And we're doing an exhibition and some workshops and a performance about his life. So just doing lots of different stuff at the moment. Really exciting times. Who said lockdown's quiet?
Yeah.
So I'm Valerie. Like Ruth, I'm in a group called Breathing Fire, which is a playback theatre company, community-based, and we work with groups, women, audiences, gone into prisons, and doing playback theatre, which is stories from the audience as opposed to my story. Whereas in this group, Black Women Let Loose, it's our stories that we're sharing with the audience. So it's great to be invited here and to be part of today's discussion. So thank you.
I'm Rachel, and I've been in the arts sector for over 25 years. My background is dance, but I also program and curate and produce work for festivals, and equality trainer, equality and diversity, also done a lot of work in the community. I'm now working for a mainstream arts organisation, won't say who they are, but which is great, really loving being part, still part of the arts sector. But yes, and thank you for inviting us to be here with you.
And just to say, the two members that aren't here, Yoma Smith and Lorna Henry, and you know, they I'm sure that they will, if they're not watching now, they'll probably be watching on the YouTube channel at a later stage. But yeah, so that's the 6 of us.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you. So we've got some questions. So this session, I suppose, to the audience, we did a previous session which was pre-recorded on YouTube, which you may or may not have seen. And if you haven't, it doesn't matter. It's up on both of our channels, so you can go in and watch that. But in that session, we discussed things like making your own stories into theatre, being Black in the arts industry or the theatre industry, working through COVID, you know, staying creative through lockdown, Black Lives Matter. So it's quite a big discussion. So this is sort of a follow-up to that, so we could talk about those things more, go deeper into any of that, or other questions and other things that you might want to talk about. Shall I start off with one of our audience questions?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, that'd be good.
So just log in. Okay, so if you had any budget you needed, what would be your dream job to produce?
Wow, it's a big question, actually. It's always difficult to dream that big, but I think recently we've been performing at Resort Vic, like you mentioned, with the Fairmont, and we've got a lot of big ideas with that show. So I think on the medium term, we would like to develop that and have a wild way of doing that show. So maybe using technology, having maybe a well-known directors to come and help us, and someone who can help us with a movement director. So something that we haven't really been able to due to budget restrictions so far. And as well, we're thinking about costume, you know. So there's a lot of possibility that when you did our last show, we were kind of restricted because the budget was restricted. But also, I think in the wider, we would like to go on tour, go work with people overseas as well. So there is a lot of possibility we would love to. I don't know if the other one to add anything onto that.
I would say that one of the things we would like to explore more as well is like African theatre. So some of us have been doing workshops over the summer with a organisation called Utopia, and they've been doing quite a lot around African theatre, African storytelling, and just trying to inject that into our whatever, you know, if we really want to expand Amistad. So looking at how we inject that. And maybe, you know, having, you know, much more percussion and music and dancing in it. So that would be really great, because obviously those things, you know, the budget is quite big for that. So if we had an unlimited budget, it'd be really great. But just to inject a lot more of African storytelling into what we're doing as well.
Yeah. I think that kind of covers it, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you mentioned the kind of costumes and things, and I think one of the things that for us is maybe upskilling ourselves as well. You know, we talked about getting a producer or a director in, but maybe having somebody to come and give us some training individually, you know, mentoring, that'd be great. Shadowing people, you know, to upskill ourselves so that we make better shows. That's, yeah.
Yeah, nothing to add.
Thank you. Okay, well, in that case, I shall move on to the next question. What do you think other companies could do to help Black audiences feel more involved in shows? Is representation the key?
I'll ask that one. I think representation helps, but if you've got a rubbish story and lots of other things that aren't going for it, then why would you want to go in the first place? So representation, yeah, of course that helps, but that's not the be all. Because for me personally, if I was going to see something purely on representation and it was rubbish, I wouldn't want to go to the theatre again. So, but yeah, I that would probably help me get in the door to see it advertised in a way that, oh, there's somebody like me that's in it, or somebody like me who's written it or directed it. There's information about it. So because, you know, I'm born and bred in Bristol, and lots of my education and going to films and theatre doesn't represent me, but I love the theatre and I love the storytelling of it. So you need to have that as well. But that's me. I don't know what the group feels.
I think storytelling is really important. My family aren't very, don't go to the theatre that often. You know, it's really difficult to get them to go to see anything, and they'll say, look, you know, they don't want to go to something that's sort of not uplifting. They want things that are funny. You know, they want to get up and dance and move. They find it really hard to go and sit somewhere in the dark for a couple of hours, you know, and sit still. So I think it's about looking at sort of making theatre more accessible. So we've been to theatre in London where they've involved the audiences a lot more in the production. So it's more, I mean, you know, we talk about playback where people tell their stories, but also you can have theatre where the performers are interacting with the audience more, you know, coming out to the audience, getting them involved in it. So things like that bring people to a sense of, it's not just about me watching, but I can be involved in that process as well. Something that's a bit more uplifting. I mean, not all theatre is uplifting, but coming away feeling that something has been triggered inside of you that makes you feel a bit better about, not even about life, but about circumstances, that you may have a key or an answer to some of the things that's happening in your life. So just having those qualities are really important in theatre to try and engage audiences more who don't tend to go.
Could I just add, when you were saying that, Ruth, I was thinking about rules of theatre. Like, we go and we sit down and we keep quiet and we watch something. And I know when I go with you lot, or if I go with my family, not always sitting down, keeping still. We want to, because it's hit us, we want to go, yeah, that was good, or we want to join in. And some theatre and plays that we've seen, they invite that. So you've invested in it and you're part of it. When you sort of got to keep still and you really want to show something emotionally, that's like, well, it's really, there's something about rules of theatre as well, and how you engage us as an audience as well. So if I'm feeling it and I go, yeah, I don't need someone to turn around and go, shh. You know, it's like, because I'm in there, I'm on that stage with that actor, you know, I've really felt something, and I think that helps as well.
Jamaica, if you go to theatre in Jamaica, it's like that. The audiences will answer back to the performers. They'll berate them if they don't like what they're doing. You know, if they don't like the character, they'll talk at the character and they'll laugh to each other. And you know, people feel really invested and involved in what's happening on the stage.
Yeah, and that happened with Missing Pieces when we were, that's another, Missing Pieces is a theatre group that brings stories by Black writers to the theatre, and it's script in hand. And I remember taking my dad to watch a particular theatre, and like Ruth was saying, my dad was talking to the actor, like, don't go in there, don't go in there. But, you know, and people were nodding and making noises, and the actors were like, yeah, you're right, you know. But it was invested. So for him, that was a good evening. If somebody had turned around and said, oh, please don't talk, you can't talk while this is on, I was like, well, I'm not going there again. So there is something about accessibility as well.
That's
Nice.
really interesting, that because we often think, you know, about the story side of it, we need to have more stories, more Black stories, more representation on the stage. And I think the audience is not thought about as much from the other side. So I think that's a really interesting, thing to think about. Brill.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Stories are important as well, though. They are really.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Brill.
I don't know if Christelle or Rachel wanted to add.
No,
No,
just
I think you covered it
Yeah.
very well.
covered it.
I would definitely love to come to more theatre like that. You know, I like sitting there quietly, kind of, you know, in my own little zone. But I think, you know, when you watch TV at home, you can shout at the TV, you can have
Yes.
big emotions in your living room and be free. And in the theatre, you have to kind of hold that in, which is strange because the theatre has such big emotions. So in some ways, it's strange that the audience has to kind of sit quietly.
We've got a question coming in from the audience asking if venue is important too, and I totally agree. I think some of the building are not very inviting to some audience, so people would not feel like they belong to those spaces. And I think and that's part, again, it covers some of what Valerie and Ruth said, but I think it's important to bring some of the story that not always been told in the specific building. So some theater, for example, are very classical, very Western canon of delivering stories, but bringing African, Caribbean stories is so important as well, I think, on those buildings. And I think it's the same for any kind of industry. Building is really, really important because it kind of represents that institution. So if it's not accessible, if it's not inviting to the audience, that is not going to help. But yeah, I don't know if someone else wants to add anything about building.
Well, I was
say
thinking
that,
what they
when we
did with
did
the old Vic. The old Vic, they moved it, didn't they? If you look at the old Vic and the grandiose of how it was before, and now the entrance is, the main entrance now was to the side. It's, you know, more inviting. It hasn't got that, we are this grand place and you can't come in. It's like on a lower level. It's open. You can open it out onto the street. It's more inviting. So, I mean, just looking at something that we all know and we've been involved in, you could see just by the difference of having the opening different makes that more accessible.
I was going to say that a friend said to me that came to Ferment, what she liked was being able to sit around tables and drink while you were watching the show. And so that cabaret style setup where it's a bit, people feel that it's a bit more informal, you know, that they feel a bit more relaxed in that sort of environment. So thinking about those sorts of ways of just making the audience feel more comfortable rather than sitting in rows. You know, why do they have to sit in rows? You get more people in, but, you know, not necessarily will you get the sorts of people in that you might want to attract when you have theatre like that. So yeah, venue is important. You know, how you're welcomed when you come into the space. You know, if somebody sort of, you know, is helping you to go to your seat, if you get a program, so you get a sense of what's going on. Yeah, so just that, yeah, just to lay out the ambience of the space is really important in terms of venue.
I really found that with Ferment. I really liked the table, the layout and just all the space. And yeah, I thought that I really enjoyed that. Anything else you want to add before I move on to the next question?
Yep.
The audience are all being very well behaved. I forgot to say turn off your mics unless you're talking, but they've all been so quiet. But if you do, as someone has typed in the chat, if you have any questions or you want to ask a question, just pop it in the chat and we'll come to it. So the next question is, have you performed any of your shows outside of Bristol? And if so, how does it compare to being in Bristol?
So I'll go with that one. We our first show was actually in March 2019. So we've performed in 3 different venues in Bristol, and then we got a gig at RADA in London, and that was in March this year. Yeah, is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was. Gosh.
Just before lockdown.
Before lockdown.
Yeah.
So we performed 3 shows in Bristol, 1 in London, and then lockdown happened. And it was really interesting in London in the RADA show. Obviously, RADA is quite a prestigious place. We talked about venues. It was quite a nice venue to perform in, actually. And it was much more informal with, I would say so, than say the Old Vic, for instance. It had a feel like about similar to, say, the Wardrobe Theatre in St. Old Market. We had more Black audiences at RADA, and part of me wonders whether it's because there are so many more outlets in London to promote theatre. People tend to go to theatre more often. There's more local radio, community radio that advertise theatre. There's a lot more money and bigger budgets in London to try and promote and market theatre and get people to come, because we didn't actually do any marketing for our gig in London, but it was sold out. And then things changed a little bit because of COVID, and people couldn't come to it on the day, not everybody, but we still had a fantastic audience. But we did no marketing whatsoever, and our show got sold out straight away in London. And it wasn't our friends, it wasn't just our friends and family that came, because in fact, a lot of people that came didn't know us. So I do think that you get people that come to theatre. What we find, my sense is that people are more engaged in theatre in London, and they're more likely to come and see a show, even if they don't know the cast, because that's what they're used to doing. Whereas if we were a company coming to Bristol, we probably would have to promote ourselves a lot more from if we were coming into the city to do that. But then we've also worked with Weave and Fire, done tours around the country, and we've worked with communities much more so, rather than sort of gone to community and did performances in community venues. And what we found, that the people that tended to be part of the community rather than people that weren't part of that community. And we do community radio and promote ourselves on community radio. So there are ways of getting people to theatre by using community radio. But if you're going to go outside of Bristol, London's pretty good, really good. But I think if you're going to go other places, you do need to do quite a lot of marketing to get representative audiences. That's my experience anyway. Don't know if anyone wants to add anything.
No, I agree. No, you've said it.
Okay, I will move on then to the next question. Do you think theatre is still relevant as a medium, and does it have the power to change?
For me, I think theatre is as relevant as any other medium to tell a story, and it's a very powerful medium, I think. And I've always said, I think I prefer theatre in a way to film, for example, because linked to what Ruth said earlier about connecting to the audience, it's a lot more instant. So you've got the audience in the room who can react with emotion straight away. With film, it's kind of more removed connection between the actors and the audience. And I think in that sense, it's a lot more powerful. But I also think theatre is, in terms of telling our own stories, is a really powerful way of making change. And we've seen it at the end of each of our performances, people coming to us and say, oh my God, I can tell my own story now after seeing you. I didn't realize I can't talk about my own story, because we are telling our own story. So they find something they can relate into that. That's making them, okay, I can't tell my own story. So I think theatre is definitely very powerful.
I was going to add that depending on the topic, I mean, you know, Emma's Tides was around the kind of Black Lives Matter, which is obviously a major issue for our society, but also particularly for Black people. And I think that opportunity to kind of share the experiences of a Black person faced with racism. Some of my white friends weren't aware of some of the issues that we as Black people sometimes face. So organizations as well, they were like, oh, actually, through us representing or presenting our stories and our experiences, it opens people's eyes, and hopefully that will incite some change in people's attitudes. So yeah, I think theatre is very powerful because it's not like a lecture. You can use humor, you can use movement, you use your body. So then that's, I think, more people are more receptive to theatre than they would to maybe, you know, a straightforward lecture. So yeah, I think theatre, you can use it really to incite change, definitely.
Yeah, with Emma's Tides, there's a one bit in there which we performed as part of these sessions, and it's about microaggressions. And interestingly, there's been quite a lot of conversations about that piece, about how people don't recognize their behavior sometimes, and then they see it on stage and they think, good grief, I've behaved like that, but I've never really thought about it, or, you know, I've been treated in that way, but I've never seen it. And so that's awakened something in people. And also, I talked about the fact we also do interactive performance theatre, so forum theatre and playback theatre. And we've been doing some work in prisons with Breathing Fire, and it was really interesting. We did some work in young offenders prisons with young men. So we had us as Black women going into a prison of young men, doing theatre for them. And we had 2 other Black guys with us performing too. And it was really interesting because some of these young lads have never been to theatre ever before, never seen a show. And what was really interesting was at the end, they would come up to us and tell us that having seen the performance, it's made them want to change their behavior. One guy said, I'm going to pick the phone up and call my sister, because we'd done a scene about a young man and his sister and falling out. And he said, it made me want to pick the phone up now and speak to my sister and have a conversation with her about my behavior. So that is really powerful, that, you know, you've got these Black women going into prison, working with men who've never seen theatre, and at the end of it, them coming up to us saying, I want to do something differently. I want to behave differently. I want to have more ambition in my life. And so that, yeah, really powerful. You couldn't go in and teach them a lecture, as Richard was saying, and have that effect at all.
I think we know that theatre is such a powerful art form anyway, because it's huge, isn't it? Look how many theatres there are across Britain and across England. We know it's a powerful tool. And I think for me is, for a long time, we've known theatre, how it makes us feel and how powerful it is, but who has the power to be telling the stories, and how is that projected? I think that's another question. I think theatre as an art form, across the world, everybody knows performance art can change, but it's about whose stories are being told and who's got the power to put it on and get it out there for people to see it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, theatre is also powerful for actors themselves. I think at the end of a production, an actor would have grown, because they would have gone through doing a lot of research about the character. It might be an area of their life they've never really been involved. And that's kind of, you open up a completely different world to where they normally live, and having to invest themselves into a character. And sometimes it's quite emotional, some of the character actors are playing. So I think in a personal level, actors are always coming out as a growth, as a different person. when they finish playing one character. And for me, I think I have found it therapeutic in a way, having to tell my own stories. And I know the other lady can back me up on this, because there's some time in rehearsal when I'm telling my own story, I had to stop and think again, because it's become so emotional. But actually, by telling my own story, actually I felt like I am growing, because I'm actually owning that story. I am giving it to the world and sharing my experience with other people. So at the end of it, I have kind of felt like, yes, I have grown. I've become, being vulnerable and giving the story has made me a different person in a way.
Yeah.
Anything else to add? That was, yeah, really, thank you. Great answers. Really, yeah, I think definitely very powerful. Theatre is very, I mean, obviously I think that because I work in it, but it's really, you know, really interesting to hear, because I, as an actor, I didn't, you know, I've kind of thought about that, but not really on the outside of it being changing me when I work on a character, or, I mean, I know that it does, but it's quite interesting to think about it. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. I think, well, you've sort of answered it actually. It was, how do you take theatre to audiences that traditionally don't go to the theatre? So if you wanted to add anything else.
Well, definitely kind of what Ruth was saying about going into the communities, into prisons, schools, obviously. Also, festivals are really good because people go there for different reasons, and a lot of the festivals, some of the bigger ones now, they have theatre shows going on. And I imagine that one of the things that I would do, or I've done with other things I've done like dance, is piggyback an event that is happening in the local community, and then sort of sneak in and put on a show because they're not expecting a theatre show. Maybe they're out there just for a barbecue and to listen to some music. So finding opportunities where you can put even if it's just a short extract of your show. Obviously, you know, everything's now going digital, so that's a real opportunity to put theatre in front of people who don't normally go to theatres. And just be courageous, take risks. Outdoor, I mean, there's street performances, outdoor performances, shopping centres are really good, you know, gallery spaces are really good. In the last few years in Bristol, they've talked about animating museum collections and libraries. So, you know, that I think is a really good venue. People go there to look at artifacts, but actually you can put a theatre performance in, makes it a bit more exciting. Definitely, and I think Bristol will be really lucky in that. Well, obviously this year we haven't had any any major outdoor events. Generally, so did you know that we did? No, nothing has happened. But normally this would be a really good opportunity if we were not in lockdown this summer. We'd have been doing more performances at local events that don't normally have theatre. So yeah, those, you know, be brave, take risks, get out there.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say about in Brighton, I was involved in it was a museum that had a lot of stuffed animals. It was a collection, an old Victorian collection. It's quite a quirky museum in Brighton. And during part of the Fringe, we were amongst these stuffed birds, and just bringing stories about the person who collected them and the time, and people would be taken around. And I know that's not unique to Brighton. I did it in Bristol once at the Commonwealth Museum, and writers would concentrate on one display. I can remember Ros doing a piece on suitcases, and that just brings.
By the way, Valerie.
That was who?
That was me.
Oh, sorry, Ruth. So I remember the suitcases, and so it was Ruth. who wrote a piece about those suitcases. So it brings the display to life. So once again, the power of theatre, the power of performance. It's not necessarily a place where you were expecting to see a piece of theatre. So yeah, I think it works. Sorry, Ruth.
No, that's right. I was gonna say the other thing we did do, Rachel got me thinking, we did a little flash mob in the summer, didn't we, for someone's party, and we did Still I Rise by Maya Angelou, and that was really engaging for the people. It was an outdoor event. It's probably the only outdoor event we've done this year, and it was a great surprise. But the audience just really, and they didn't know it was going to happen, but they really loved the fact that we just turned up and performed this piece of Still I Rise. So those sorts of things, you know, are really engaging for audiences that don't tend to usually go to theatre. Just to have people turn up at an event and perform, it's almost like a treat to them. Yeah,
definitely.
And I think we're talking earlier about people don't come to a building, to a specific building. But if you look at different cultures, so for example, in African theatre, people are just gathering in the middle of the village. So people sit in the square of the village and have a performer in the village. So there is no venue. So I think that's also a very different concept. So people who might have lived in Africa and moved to the West are not used to that idea of having to sit in a building to go see a theater performance. So I think, I do really like the whole idea of doing outdoor performance because it's a lot more accessible for people.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that sort of ties into the next question in a way, which is, after COVID, what does theatre need to take with it from this experience to grow and survive? I mean, that's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, I think theatre, like we say, is always about stories. So the stories are always there. And I think, like we need to find we have to create new ways of telling the stories, find new venues, maybe street theatre is going to be maybe more prominent because we still have to keep our distance for a while, I guess. Technology is going to play a big importance, I think, moving forward as well. So we've been used to this life of Zoom, and people have done a lot of performances on Zoom throughout lockdown. So that is maybe another way of reaching new audiences as well. I mean, I think we have to see art and culture in a very different way as we are used to it. We have to be very innovative of how we're going to deliver the stories to the world.
I think after COVID, just looking at the impact of COVID on I'm going to talk about Black and minority ethnic communities at the moment, how theatres respond to that. And one of the things that, again, there's been a lot of research being carried out, and I've been attending some events with a company called Ink Arts looking at racism in the theatre, and it's been quite stark really about how specifically Black theatre practitioners have felt excluded, discriminated against. Their experiences of racism in the theatre has been really quite distressing, and people have been sharing stories that is illuminated quite a lot. And they've just started having conversations now with the theatre directors, theatre companies, about how they can address some of these issues of racism. And I think that learning from COVID and about how Black and minority ethnic communities are impacted by inequality, a lot more by inequality in society and systemic racism, theatres have got to now look at how they change their practices to encourage more of us to be involved in theatre making, attend more as audiences and feel engaged in theatre, that our stories are more are told with same prominence as other people's stories as well. So I think that COVID has highlighted inequality, and theatres need to look at that and look at themselves and their own practices and say, what do we need to do to ensure that inequality in our theatres can be eliminated, and how do we work with Black and minority ethnic communities, performers, artists of all different genres to try and ensure that their stories have more prominence, and that we eliminate some of the discriminatory practices. So this is an opportunity, and if systemic racism doesn't change, then it's going to be really sad, because this has been a wake-up call, and if we can't heed this wake-up call, then it worries me about what is needed in order to change that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you would hope that technology would push some of that, because if you haven't got the money to go and see theatre, or how does technology, like you said, like Zoom, for instance, how is technology pushing the agenda? Because before it tended to be white males who had the power, still have the power, but in reference to YouTube access, technology could be, and in some cases, one of the main ways where you can reach minority audiences where you couldn't reach them before. So, yeah, we don't know how long this COVID's going to be, but I think it is about looking at other ways, and it's just not accessing a particular place.
I think there was something around representation and just ensuring that I'm just not talking about stories and people on stage, but theatre is more representative throughout the whole of the industry, from people working behind, backstage, to directors, writers, producers, theatre, artistic directors, performers, and audiences. So, and theatre will grow from it. If it's more everybody benefits. Theatre grows from it. So this is an opportunity for it to happen, but we all need to be pushing and pulling together in order to make that change.
And I think also something we learned with COVID is all about how, as a human being, we need connection. And at some point, we need to come back together. We can't just stay isolated forever, I think. And I think theatre will be, we talk about it as a powerful medium, and I think theatre will be a very important way to connect people in the future. And I think creativity and art and culture is going to be really important. Once everything tries to resettle, we're going to need that to help people to reconnect, to find some way of finding joy in what they do on an everyday basis. So I think theatre is going to be really important. I know it's really difficult because it's one of the sectors who really suffered with COVID. But yeah, it's one of the sectors that people really need at the moment to find that connection. So it's a really interesting time. But I think if we can come out of this time, I think theatre, like Ruth said, is going to grow. Somehow it's almost like it's going to the bad before something flourish out of it. But I am keeping positive that theatre is going to be one of the sector that is going to flourish in the future.
Hope so.
Thank you. I just wanted to sort of add to that a little bit, just to sort of ask a bit further, in kind of connection with the last video that you did, and you talked about the murder of George Floyd and how traumatic that time was for all of you, and how a lot of people were coming to you and, you know, asking you to talk about it and asking for your advice and sort of, you know, to help with their own guilt, and you know, how overwhelming that was, and also thinking about, I was thinking about the piece with the manager, and all the microaggressions, and you know that he was trying to help, but actually it was, you know, the opposite of that. And I suppose I'm interested to know, just because I noticed at the time there was, you know, lots of social media support from companies and individuals, and that was just flooding the internet. And I'm interested in how you feel that is now, that support, or that kind of over needing your input, wanting you to sort of help, you know, guide people through their realizations of their own racism and everything. So I'm just wondering how you feel it is now, months on.
I think so the realization, yes, definitely the statements around, you know, we support Black Lives, and organizations saying that they wish to diversify their organizations, and conversations which have been going on for 20, 30 years, okay, locally. I'm talking about Bristol. I'm being involved in equality and diversity for so long. But I think what is the slight change this time is that Black people themselves are taking action and talk and make, you know, implementing changes and coming forward. But also I think it's really important not to exploit that, you know, our wish and our desire by asking us to do free training for this. It's been traumatic, obviously, for us, and we've had to dig deep and seek support from each other just to kind of basically survive. And I think you would have seen, if you watched the show, it was really emotional. And the piece that I did, my voice broke. And that was what happened to me with the whole George Floyd incident, not being able to watch the video. But then people have said, yes, they feel guilty, they feel bad, what can we do? Everybody needs to take responsibility and actually take action. You know, words are not enough. And what I'm worried about is that it's going to get quiet. You know, the kind of Black Lives, you know, all those statements might stay, you know, sort of like a banner, but I want to know what organizations are actually going to do. They all conferences and loads of training, but my fear, I hope I'm wrong, it's that they'll just go round and then it'll stop and then they'll be diverted to do other things. It'll cost money for a lot of organizations to make those changes, and if they're committed, they have to put the money where their mouths are. Unfortunately, I'm not confident. I know it sounds really negative, but I don't feel that there's enough sincerity in those statements. It's the guilt. Guilt doesn't do anything. You know, feel guilty, say I'm sorry, but actually do something about it. So yeah, that's a personal point of view. Sorry, I'm negative, aren't I? What's wrong with me? I want to be optimistic. But
don't feel negative. I feel the same. No, I feel the same. I mean, I was doing a panel discussion a few days ago and around decolonizing education, and I exactly have a similar response to it. And I feel like, you know, there was so many talk about decolonizing everything at the moment, decolonizing the art, decolonizing the education, decolonizing the curriculum. But my feeling is that, again, we're falling into another narrative where we're just using a buzzword, decolonize, but without really thinking what is behind that. You know, when you talk about decolonization, nobody ever talk about power or structure. They only talk about, diversifying our workforce, diversifying our audience. Okay, if you're gonna bring Black and Asian people into your audiences and Black and Asian people into your workforce, does that mean we're really decolonizing your culture? If the structure of your organization is still the same, if the people who's got the power is still the same, nothing is going to change. And for me, the narrative is going to change when every organization is really going to look at that kind of structure. Who is at the top of the chain? Who is making power in this organization? Then we can look at thinking about bringing more diversity and more inclusion into the organization. But I think the basic has not been addressed. And that's where I am very skeptical in a way. And when this Black Lives Matter movement happened, everybody came out with their statements, and some people gave donation. But for me, it was just a tick box exercise to show to the world that we are doing something. But in the background, none of the basic structure have not changed. So until they readdress that, and I think I agree with Rachel as well, it's all about personal responsibility as well. And I think for me, I got so exhausted for 6-7 months that I had to take a back seat and have to reflect on my own actions and how do I actually contribute to this narrative that is really driving inequalities. Because I've lived not all my life, but a big part of my life in the Western world. So I have adopted that kind of mentality of the way of thinking. Then I have to readdress myself. Does my action really serve the world? Is there anything I can do to educate myself even more? To drop out some of the belief I have that I acquired from the Western world. So for me, it's just more of a reflection at the moment and see. And I think part of telling my own story and where I'm coming from is a tiny bit of how I can change my way of doing things, because for a long time, I'm not going to talk about myself because it's not making any difference, but actually it does make a difference to some people's world. So by telling how things have happened in some part of my life is actually giving someone out there the courage to take another action themselves, or to actually view that life is not always the way we see it in the Western world. There's other way people see life in general. So yeah, I could go on for it because I'm quite passionate about it, but in a way I do feel like I'm waiting to see the action in organization before I can become so excited. Yes, we are the changer here. But at the same time, like I say, it's personal. If enough individuals are taking actions, I think as a collective, then maybe the change could happen.
I think, I mean, what we're talking about is systemic change, aren't we? We've been saying all along, you can have as many great statements on your website, you can take down as many statues as you want, but if systemic change doesn't happen, we don't see inequalities reduced, we don't see Black people in more positions of power, or having access to that power, we're just wasting our time. And I think it has been very hard, because at the same time you feel as though you need to be part of that struggle, you need to be out there, you need to be standing up and saying, telling it how it is, and responding to people's questions and queries, and wanting to ask you about what they can do. But at the same time you're so tired of it, because this has been going on for centuries, and for us it's not just since George Floyd, we have or other murders this has been going on for centuries, and we are very tired of it. So sometimes you just want to crawl into your bed, put the duvet over you, and just not come out for 5 days or a week, whatever. And at the same time, that you also have a responsibility, as Christelle and Rachel were saying, about speaking out and telling your story as well. So there's this sort of, you're torn between these extremes, and the duty to tell, and the wanting to just rest because you're just tired. And it's just trying to find that balance, really, for us. It's just trying to find that balance, because that to look after yourself, you need to rest, but also because you've got that responsibility, or we all have, not just me as an individual, we all have, you need to be involved in the conversation, and you need to be involved in the struggle. It's difficult when you're sort of navigating the two extremes all the time, and that in itself is tiring as well. But if we want systemic change, we have to be part of that. We have to be part of that conversation.
Amen to everything.
Amen.
Yeah, and thank you for, sharing with us today and, talking about that. And yeah, thank you. We have reached 3 o'clock.
Wow.
I know. So I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to stay on, and it's up to you. We've got sort of questions from sort of in-house. And so, I mean, if anybody needs to leave, then they absolutely can. I can just stay here on my own. But
I mean, I'm happy to answer a couple of more questions. I don't know if
Yeah.
the others have got time, but
Great.
Yeah. What questions are coming in?
So these are the sort of internal questions. So yeah, if anybody needs to go, yeah, I have to go, but thank you for such a brilliant and enlightening conversation. So
thank you for
Thank you
coming.
for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, and if anyone needs to go, that's totally fine. It'll be on YouTube, so you can watch the end at a later date once we've got the tech. It took a bit of a while with the last one. Okay, great. Well, I will go on to the next set of questions. Okay, so we've got 3. Why do you need to create your own theatre? What are your processes for creating?
Oh, okay. So the relevance of being Black women and not having had a voice in theatre, it's really important. And that's why we set up the group and now a company to tell stories so Black women's voices are heard. In terms of, so that was our inspiration, is that we have stories to tell. We also need to enable and support other women and other people, Black women particularly, to also tell their stories. So in terms of that process, so that was our kind of inspiration for starting. So we had, we sat and put some themes on the table. What can we talk about? What are the experiences of Black women? What are our experiences? And Shades of Our Lives was our first show. And we spent maybe a couple of hours just sitting around, all putting things into the hat, as it were, loads of ideas. And then we then sort of broke them down into kind of themes and then discussed whether there would be monologues, would be a dialogue, would it be a dance movement piece? How would we present that? Always good to have a sort of a task list and also an end date. So then, you know that you've got kind of a deadline. For me, it's really important to have a deadline. So you have a deadline to work towards. Be open to changing those. You might write something the first time, share it with the group, and then we can then, how does it sound? So you might write it and think, yes, it's what I've written, that. But then when you're performing it, you need to kind of go through a process of tweaking it, rehearsing it, practicing it, and then getting others in the group to feed it back to you and say, yes, actually, yeah, that's great. But if you put that word instead of that, that's more, that will tell the story better. And so be open to change, and don't be too precious about the piece the first piece, because you might go cry in the corner and come back and say, okay, yeah, you're all right. And I guess
what do you mean by that?
Well, I wrote a piece and I did my performance. Truth is, there was a piece I did, and initially it was like 1, and then it was broken. Then we had some feedback, and then it was broken into 3 separate pieces to perform. I was just like, it completely disorientated me because I'd rehearsed it. I knew it off the top of my head. I could just, and then suddenly when it was broken into 3 pieces, I could completely lost me. Although it was the same text, I was completely lost performing it. I was just like, which bit comes? So yeah. So be open to that, and be brave. I think it's really important to be brave, and read it back, redo it, review it, so that each time you perform it, it might be different. So yeah, that's I guess. And some stuff is emotive. I think Christelle touched on it, and I touched on it as well. Especially if the subject is really sensitive, be aware of that, and be prepared for breaking down in the middle of a performance or in terms of sharing your story. And we've heard, that happens, but actually it makes it a much more powerful story. Sometimes it may be better that you don't tell your story, that you ask somebody else to tell it, as almost like an objective, objective point of view. They're telling the story on your behalf. So yeah, play with it, and get somebody from the outside to come and look at it, film it and watch it back. And, you know, don't cringe, because you'll see yourself on film, you're like, gosh, was that me? Did I really look like that? But it's really important, because if you're going to be performing in front of an audience, you need to also be able to see yourself and how it looks, and then tweak it. That's, I don't know, anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go on.
I was going to say, just in the process of how we create, I think there's some exercise people can do, and I think we touched it in the previous video, but I know during lockdown, we were meeting once a week, and we set ourselves smaller tasks. So for example, we had to pick up an object and write about it, and it didn't really matter what it was. And we also picked up like one of very well-known stories and put our own twist into it. So there is different exercise you can do in terms of creating. And I think for me, it's just sometimes when you're faced with a blank page, it's really scary. But I think I've kind of learned to just put word on the page. And like Rachel said, then later not be afraid to maybe remove some of it, add some more, but just put whatever is coming on the page, and not to be too worried about what is coming up. That's kind of my way of trying to get something down on paper.
I was going to say another way of doing it, and Rachel touched on that, is like around improvisation. So one of our pieces from Shades of Our Lives is called "Are You Black Enough?" And that started off by just us improvising in the theatre space, playing with ideas, playing with our thoughts, playing with themes, playing with things that people people tend to think that we as Black women don't do, such as swimming or riding a motorbike or singing in a choir, you know, a choral society. And all that came about by us just playing with ideas, improvising it, and then scripting it afterwards. So if people struggle with writing and think, oh, I don't know where to start, sometimes that improvisational process is another good way to look at how you can create a script. And, you know, it's got a lot of humor in it as well. And we wanted it to be really funny, and it is very funny. And I don't know if I had tried to sit down and write a piece like that, I don't think I would have done it in the same way, and it wouldn't definitely have had that sort of humor. So yeah, that was a really creative way of devising a piece that really worked for us, and really told quite a lot of stories within it, and carried a lot of humor as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not writing isn't my thing. I find that really hard, but I do like improvisation and the creative side of coming together and just doing however we want to be creative. And it's about the safetiness of being able to do that. So yeah, sharing with people that if they are going to say something that's not what you want to hear, it's not coming from a place of hatred, it's coming from a place of love to want you to do better, or it's an opinion. It's not like someone's trying to get one over on you and anything. So I think that helps, because then that gives you the confidence to share. So however, whether you're a writer, singer, whatever it is, if you trust someone's opinion, or you can have that debate and conversation, that helps as well.
True.
Oh, your sound's off, Rebecca.
I know, I just realised that because my tummy started rumbling. I was like, oh, put the mute on.
Time to eat.
So how much of your stories should you share in your performances? Is there a line to draw? What are the triggers? And how do we take care of ourselves and our well-being?
That's lots of questions.
I know, all in one.
Yeah.
Just take one sort of.
I mean, I try to
area.
answer from my perspective. How much of your story do you share? I think that's an individual each individual will be having to define what's a comfortable of sharing with, and what's the limit. I think that's the same. I mean, for me personally, I am quite open to tell my own story, but if the story involves other people, then I need to think, have I got the right to tell that story? Because it's not really just my own story. Also, by telling that story, how would that affect them as well? So I tend not to talk about, if it's from my own life and the people are still with me at the moment, I tend not to touch those areas. I would only tell story that really is my own story, that I know I can take responsibility of whatever is being shared. In terms of triggers, I think that is, I don't know, it's depend of the moment, I guess, how feeling vulnerable I am at the time when I'm sharing that story. I think that's because I could tell that story and don't get triggered, but tomorrow I could tell the story and get triggered. And I've had that, like I mentioned earlier, in some of the rehearsals. So if I've had an emotional week, for example, and I am going to tell, and I had that happen, I was telling a story about my late mother, and I just burst into tears. So, at other time I could easily tell the same story and not be triggered because I am in a completely different mental space, or I'm not as tired. So it's really different time what will trigger a different thing. I think, like when you said earlier, during the summer when a lot of things was happening around Black Lives Matter, with all the killings happening, a lot of things was triggering me. A lot of stories were triggering me. So I think, yeah, it's depending of what's happening in my life at that specific time. And how do I take care of myself? I think I do a lot of meditation. I try to take time off as much as I can, although it's really difficult. I'll probably preach and saying, oh, do exercise, go for a walk. And at the moment, I'm only managing that 2-3 days a week. And I should be going out for a walk every day, really, to try to keep my own well-being on top. But I know it's really difficult. But I do try to keep the meditation on. But also I think my morning routine is really important. I do this, some of you might know out there, the morning pages. So I really need to do my morning pages and dump everything that is in my head into the page before my day starts. So that doesn't bother me all day. I don't have to think about what is going on in my head when I get up. So morning pages, the meditation, and then even just to sit down for 5 minutes before I start my day with my cup of tea, just to breathe, is really important. So those kind of routine, I think it's quite important to keep my well-being.
Rachel, you go, Rachel.
So for me, definitely those that, sharing stories. I've been, there's some stories I've shared with the group that I wouldn't at this point put on stage. Very much like Christelle saying, because it involves other people, and you don't want to cross that boundary. It's really important. And also, I think in terms of just looking after myself, having being a group, there's 6 of us, which is great. So we support each other. We're meeting weekly, but even in we have a check-in. So just being able to talk to somebody who understands what's kind of going on, just to kind of breathe and just, oh gosh, that really was hard for me, because exercise really important. I Zumba in my hallway, literally. I need to do that regularly because that just kind of keeps me grounded. dance, because dance, I guess, is my background. I find that's kind of my go-to space. Lucky to have a garden, so just being out in the garden, just walking in the garden. I'm not a big one for going for walks. The group knows. No, we on our retreat. We went away for a retreat. They all went off for a walk, and I went into the hot tub, literally, and then went and had a sleep. Rest, and yeah, just taking time out is really important, and don't underestimate the effect that performing, and especially performing your own story or really sensitive issues, can have. And I think with our latest production that we did, Amher's Tides, I hadn't really realized, I don't know how, but I was having nightmares during that whole period. And yes, there was so much going on in the real world, and we're trying to tell our stories within that context. Panic attacks, and then after the performance, I did our performance, they stopped, and I was like, okay, so that's what was going on. My body was responding, and I thought I was taking good care of myself already, but obviously I needed to do more. So yeah, just be aware, try and be objective. We're strong. Women are strong. We're all strong, but also don't be too strong. Have a cry. Absolutely fine. And just rest. Really important. Ruth, you were going to say?
No, I was going to say I'm a bit like you. I'm a bit opposite to Christelle. I'm not very good at meditation. I'm the sort of person that would pound in the gym, get on the treadmill and run. Go for long walks. Exercise bike. And that's how I sort of get things out of my system, and then sleep. But not I get enough of it. But I think that we're in an age where, if you look at social media, some people don't actually know where to draw the line in terms of telling their own stories.
Yeah.
So when we were younger, I didn't know people's stories. And now you look at social media and you see things on Facebook and Twitter and, whatever, Instagram, and people are just saying the most, you're thinking, gosh, you're really putting it out there. I don't know if I would be sharing that. So suddenly we're in an age where people are sharing their own stories and actually probably not even realizing the impact of sometimes what they're sharing until you get the comments back, the likes or the dislikes or the feedback that you get, and people realizing that when you put it out there, you are actually opening yourself up for response, and you can make yourself very vulnerable. So that's what's happening even when we see on social media now. So when you're putting it out there on theatre and you're in the theatre and you're writing your own story, it's almost similar. You're waiting for those responses. You're waiting for people to come back and say, yeah, but you've got a chip on your shoulder, or oh God, you got over that now, or that was a long time ago, things are different now, or it's not as bad as you make it out to be. Oh, I'm not like that. My family are, so all of those sorts of comments are coming back at you, and you've already laid your own personal story out there and you getting this pushback. So it is a really, you really have to look after yourself. You really have to look after yourself and find a way, and how that you have to be strong, as Rachel was saying. And there is this whole thing about, strong Black women, but also at the same time, that is a lot of pressure to maintain that strong Black women image. And we say among the group, don't feel as though you have to be that strong Black woman, because we all have our weaknesses, we all have our flaws, we all have days where we just, like I said, want to crawl into bed and hide under the duvet, and that's fine as well. But the good thing that we have as a group is we have each other, and we look after each other, and that's really important. And I think that if you are a solo performer, it's good to have a network of people around you that could support you, because when you are putting your stories out there, you are open for challenge and people pushing back, and you need to find ways to be resilient and get through that.
I don't know what else to add, because it's difficult, because people that are watching we're all very individual, and it's like, well, yeah, that worked for you, but that wouldn't work for me because of this or because of that. So this is our experiences of how we do what we do. My own thing is about getting out and walking and having a routine and meeting up, even if it's walking around Bristol meeting the group and knocking on the door and saying hello and standing outside in the garden, whatever it is. And I understand that, you know, people don't want to get out, and, you know, I can contact any of our group and say, you know, I'm having a duvet day, I'm not coming out, I haven't seen anyone, I'm not talking to anybody, I'm just gonna hide. And that's fine. And people will check in to say, you coming out? Are you out of the duvet today? Or, you know, whatever it is. And the group is very different. So the common theme is we're doers, but we're all very different and we all come with different skills. So if we were all the group that had the same skill, the group wouldn't be the group that we are today. We all contribute differently, we add different things. Sometimes somebody's leading on something and then they pull back on something else, and then somebody else is taking the lead. So we are, and I feel we are very lucky that a group of 6 women that we get on and do what that we're doing, and that just really helps.
Yes, I agree. We're great. We're great together. We're a great team. We make a good team.
You are great.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Actually, that's not always easy, because it could have that group, but actually the dynamic might not always work. Because I've been in groups where I didn't connect with people, so that also is a challenge in itself, being a group of performer as opposed to a solo performer. So I think in a way we are very, very lucky, because we fit quite well together. We respect each other. We understand where we're coming from. So I think trying to find somewhere or people with who you can connect and you've got common ground, even if your way of thinking is very different, is really important, you know.
Yeah. And even if you're a solo person, isn't it? Even if you're a solo performer, it's still finding that person out there, or that support network, so you can share your work and talk that through.
Yeah, and Ruth mentioned earlier that during the lockdown, we did a lot of workshop with Utopia Theatre, and that was kind of an external intensity, but actually for me that has been really, really useful during lockdown, because I could reach out to a completely different network. And I learned so much by being around those people that I've not met before. And in a way, it's almost like, okay, for this thing, for certain thing, I go to Black Women Let Loose. For other things, I can reach out to different networks. I think it's important for our own well-being to have different places we can reach out to and don't stay isolated. Yeah. We can talk forever.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking of more questions. Like, can I fit that question in? Maybe we can start an
Go
email.
on, do one last one, and we can wrap up after that.
So the last one we've got is, and you've talked about some of it already, what are the challenges you face as Black performers? And maybe as women as well.
Well, it's like, where do you want to start? Do we start with
I know.
and then work our way up or down? Where do you want?
Oh dear.
The list, and we'll add.
I mean, yeah, I think the list is long, but I think for me, in anything, I think it's finding my own voice in this whole process. I think sometimes it's quite difficult. Firstly, because I'm not a theater trained person, so I'm already trying to find my feet. And again, it's as a Black woman, we don't always have the opportunity to go to theater school. So how do you get to find your way to tell your story without those formal way of getting into the industry? I think that's in a way is a struggle, because it's almost like you have to learn by yourself what you need to do to get to that place where everybody else has already been. And then when you get there is, how do I actually tell my own story? How do I get a voice in the middle of all the noises happening out there? How do I get heard? But I think for me, it's always about authenticity. I think I'm just here to tell my own story, what my truth is. It might not be relevant for everybody, but that's who I am. So I guess that's the only things I can bring to the world. But in terms of other challenges, I suppose it's everything we talked about the lack of opportunity, the lack of spaces, lack of representation, that, as a woman or as Black women, we don't always see the story. And I guess this is part of the reason we started it, because we needed to give other people this opportunity to see Black women tell their own story out there. And I mean, there is also, I think sometimes we say there is no Black woman telling their stories. There is, but because the media is not talking about them, then we don't see it back. But you have to really dig deep. There is a lot of talented Black women all around the country telling their own story. But we need more media, more coverage of the story, so they are visible. And I think that's the challenge, is how do we become more visible as Black women? Because there's so many talented women out there, a lot of very inspirational women. And again, like I mentioned, when we went to the Ethiopia Theatre workshop, seeing all this talent from all over the UK, from all over Africa. And I was so amazed because I've never heard about them, but they are out there. But they're not, I guess they have not been fun for the mainstream media. So I was unaware of their existence. So I think one of the challenges for us is really getting a platform where we can be visible to tell our own story.
Yeah, I guess what a challenge, I guess, it's that we as a Black woman, as a Black performer, definitely to tell my story, to share my experiences, but also not to be kind of sidelined. That's all I do, is tell Black stories. We live in this society where actually some of our experiences will be relevant to other people. So having that opportunity on mainstream platforms, Christelle touched on it. So we're not just doing Black theatre for Black audiences. I think that is a challenge. I think other challenges are not having role models. I think you've touched on that. And also the time. Most of us are working other jobs. We don't have the luxury. And I guess this reflects kind of where we've been, is that we're not trained as theatre practitioners. Not all of us, some of us are. And even when I was doing dance, that was like a part-time, side job, because it doesn't pay enough. So the challenges of where we are is that financially we need to definitely have funding, because you can't time is money, and time is our expertise, what we have, but it's costly. Some of us have caring responsibilities for older relatives or grandchildren, or other members of the family that we need to look after. So those are women's challenges generally, is that you're balancing and you're juggling your care and family responsibilities, as well as this thing that you love. And not all members of the family will understand that actually how important my theatre group is to me and my well-being and my creativity. Oh, it's just that thing that you do. I've got my family now downstairs and waiting for me, like, well, where is she? And it's just like, but it's really important for me to put the time in. So it's, I guess, being appreciated that this is something really important. It's not just it's not just a hobby. It's actually really important. And I guess, in the Black community, and it's changing, and Christelle touched on it, there's a lot of Black practitioners out there that I had never come across either through Utopia. So having that level of exposure and that opportunity, if it wasn't for lockdown, I wouldn't have been able to go to those workshops, because they were all over the country. A lot of them would have been in London and Manchester. I don't think they would have held any in Bristol. So I would not have been able to afford to have gone to all those workshops. So opportunities, finance, the usual, which applies to everybody. That's kind of my personal challenge. Anybody else?
Well, I'll just quickly say, I think picking up on what you were saying, Rachel, about mainstream so that we're not just seen as the other. You know, you've got these images, women, black women being exotic and, you know, different and tantalizing, and, you know, all those images, trying to break those stereotypes of black women in theatre, of women in theatre, of women in society, of black people in society. So trying to overcome those stereotypes and challenge them. I think that's, you know, and trying to bring those different, bring that out, so that we're not just you know, I couldn't try and say the word homogeneous, you know, a homogenous group of women that are all thinking and doing the same thing. That we are very different. We all have different likes and loves and passions and dislikes, and trying to show that diversity of women and black women, you know, in the theatre, that there is a lot of difference, that we're not just streamlined as the other over there, but we can be part of mainstream theatre too, that we can play roles that traditionally were never even, you know, considered for us, that we can take on those sorts of roles that, you know, when I grew up, there were lots of roles that I would never, ever consider I could play, because I never saw any black women playing those parts. So just trying to break those stereotypes, that's a massive challenge, and becoming more mainstream. And of course, still embracing our blackness and our stories, because that's important to us, but also being part of the mainstream as well, because we can be, we should be, we need to be.
Valerie, you there?
I'm always at the end, aren't I? I was like, well, what else? Because you all say it all. I don't know what else.
She does.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know what else to add to that, because you've all, you know, you've all said it. You've all said bits of our own struggles. And for people watching, once again, it's going to be individual for them. And it is it's an individual thing, our struggles. I can't say any more than that.
I teach myself.
Left you speechless.
Yeah, I left you all speechless, like.
That's a good way to.
It's so individual and it's so different, and we will go back to where we were earlier about systemic racism and how women are in society. It just keeps going on. But I guess a positive is theatre. Theatre is powerful, it's strong, it's engaging, we love it. It helps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much. I could talk all afternoon. I mean, I know we have to wrap it up. I could keep going.
Oh, thank you to everyone who's been watching. It's been really lovely. And thank you, Rebecca, for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rebecca and Red Rope Theatre, and to the audience as well, who's still sticking with us. If you're still, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And if you do, hopefully in the new year, we will be back somewhere on stage in Bristol. But do follow us on our Facebook group if you want to find out what's happening next for us. Yeah, we are really looking forward to perform in flesh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
As we say, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Do we go by? Do you unrecord?
Oh, well, I mean, I could stop the recording and then, well, we're not recording anymore.